actually accomplish that with an investment of 20,000 security agents on the border that would be there already. David talks about what he's concerned about the border, but just remember 20,000 security agents would have been put forward through this legislation. And I believe that people should have the capacity to go to the back of the line, to learn English, to pass a background check, to pay taxes, and they must do that in order to have the earned citizenship. We know, David talks about jobs, we know that this immigration bill would actually create over 1 million jobs. We know it would also cut the debt. So this is something that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said that they're for, and David, in fact, they said that David was lying about this bill and this legislation and this position in the way that he characterized it.
You'll have your chance, Mr. Perdue. Ms. Wofford?
Both parties have been talking about immigration reform for a long time. Why aren't we talking about the laws, enforcing the laws that we already have on the books before we start to write new laws? Let's talk about our border security and giving them the tools and support that they need to enforce the existing laws that we already have. If you'll remember, in 1986, we were given immigration reform without entitlement reform. I think we really need to look at our entitlement system and disincentivizing those that want to come to our country and work around our systems we already have in place. That's going to be paramount to any discussion of immigration reform. And we have to ask, why do we not already have that already? We had a border security bill that passed in 2007, and we don't have that yet. Both big parties promise more and more reform, and yet we never get that. It's paramount that we understand we need to sit down and have the discussions about how that is going to look and what we are actually going to do about immigration instead of relying on the partisan bickering that we hear about all the time.
Well, thank you. First of all, I agree that we have to secure the border, but this is not what Michelle Nunn was talking about. I'm actually part of a bipartisan opposition to the Senate bill. The President's amnesty bill would bring 15 million new workers in over the next 10 years. This is not what the people of Georgia want to hear when they're having trouble finding jobs and getting good jobs. It just seems to me that this is a bad thought about amnesty, and this President has actually put on the table the fact that after the election that he might consider amnesty, a blanket amnesty. It just seems to me that right now, if we would get focused on the components of this and go after it, I think we could secure the border and provide solutions to this going forward. My opponent is nothing more than a rubber stamp for Barack Obama on this issue of amnesty, though. If he comes, he says she doesn't support his executive amnesty, she just wants to do it herself. And I don't think that's what we need for the workers of Georgia. She's not only going to be a rubber stamp, but he wants her in the Senate because she will fight for his failed policies that in his mind are providing good work. In my mind, that's not the case.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I want to do it myself. I would want to work with John McCain and Marco Rubio, who I assume that you would say are also a rubber stamp for President Obama in this instance. And in fact, they have said that what you have characterized around this bill is simply untrue. You sat down with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They represent business. You're running on your business record, and yet you stormed out by your own account within 10 minutes from that meeting because you couldn't have a conversation about this. They went on to say that you were lying about this bill and about their position. Again, the Farm Bureau has also supported this bill, and farmers that I've talked to over and over again say that they need this kind of legislation to actually be able to be successful in terms of farming here in Georgia. So, I'm on the side of business and farmers and people across the state that actually want solutions.
Lori?
Mr. Perdue, there's been a lot of talk about the minimum wage during this campaign. Do you think that there should be a minimum wage at all? And if so, what do you think it should be set at?
Well, it's the law of the land. What I've said is that I don't believe that it's consistent with the problem that we have right now with employment, where we have fewer people working in the United States at any time since Jimmy Carter because of the failed policies of this president. The Congressional Budget Office has actually estimated that an increase of the minimum wage from where it is now to 1010 would actually kill 500,000 jobs. Now, I'm sorry, but when people in the state of Georgia are having trouble finding work and the people who have jobs are afraid they're going to lose it, that's just not the time to be talking about something like this. But again, this is the type of policy that this president, who believes in bigger government, is trying to perpetrate on the people of Georgia, and my opponent is in agreement with that. This is not the way you create jobs. You create jobs by correcting the tax policy, pulling back on the regulators, and unlocking our energy resources. Barack Obama wants Michelle Nunn in the Senate to be a proxy for him. He says his policies are on the ballot, and in Georgia, the name of those policies are Michelle Nunn.
Ms. Nunn, do you think that the minimum wage should increase?
I do think the minimum wage should increase. I've asked David at every single one of our debates if he believes there should be a federal minimum wage, and he has yet to answer that question. I still would love to hear the answer. And if so, what do you think it should be if you don't believe it should be raised? I believe that we should raise the minimum wage. We've seen that states that have raised the minimum wage actually have higher employment rates than Georgia does. And so, you think about this. David, when you were at Dollar General, it took one of your minimum wage employees a full year to make what you made in a single day. So I suppose it is easy enough for you to say that you're not in favor of raising the minimum wage. But for the 100,000 plus families and the hundreds of thousands of children that are dependent upon minimum wage, we need to make sure that working families have the capacity to be self-sufficient. So there's clearly a difference, but I really would still like to know the answer to, do you believe that there is a federal minimum wage rate that we should have, and if so, what should it be?
Mr. Perdue, what should it be? And then we'll hear from Ms. Swafford on this issue also.
Well, I'd like to ask her a question. I asked this in the last debate, never got an answer.
That's in our
either.
next segment.
Hang on. I've already been asked one in this segment. So it just seems to me the question on the table is this type of increase in minimum wage. The question needs to be answered. Which person out of every three are you going to go tell they're losing a job? Because that's what happens when you increase the rate this much at this point in time, when the economy is not producing jobs at the rate that we should be. And again, these are the failed policies that this president is arrogant about and has said are on the ballot in this race. He wants Michelle Nunn in the Senate to help him continue his good work. When 400,000 Georgians, more Georgians, went on to food stamps in the last 6 years than actually got jobs. That's not what the people of Georgia are looking for.
Ms. Swafford, do you agree with Mr. Perdue that you raise the minimum wage and then you lose jobs?
I do not support a minimum wage. I don't believe that the government should be involved in the day-to-day decisions of a company, whether it's a small, medium, large, or supersized company. A minimum wage laws minimize the opportunity for everyone in the workforce.
Thank you all for that. Now, please, we encourage you to stay with us now. We are just getting started, and the candidates are going to have the opportunity to question one another after a short break.
During this break here at C-SPAN, we want to show you some of the ads running in the Georgia Senate race.
I'm Michelle Nunn, and I approve this message.
My dad founded Southwire in Carrollton more than 60 years ago, and today it's the leading manufacturer of power cable in North America. When I hear David Perdue say that he's proud to have outsourced jobs to other parts of the world, I have to wonder. Every time we invest in Georgia workers, they can compete with anyone in the world. So I don't know how you can be proud of having sent American jobs overseas.
David Perdue helped create and save thousands of jobs right here in America.
All Michelle Nunn seems to do is attack David.
We want to know where she is on jobs, education, national security.
She never says.
That's because she supports President Obama's agenda.
We don't need more bad policies from Washington. We need a new direction.
That's David Perdue.
David Perdue.
David Perdue.
I'm David Perdue, and I approve this message.
Now we're heading back to Atlanta.
It's now time for the candidates to question one another. We held a drawing to determine the order. First question is from Michelle Nunn. The next will be from Amanda Swafford. And the final candidate question will come from David Perdue. So we start with Ms. Nunn.
So, David, during your tenure at Dollar General, you made over $40 million. And yet there were 2,000 women that sued the company during your tenure. And they said they were paid less. And it was found by federal investigators that they were paid less. So given your experience there, I wonder if you would join me today in actually supporting the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would help ensure that all women are paid equally to their counterparts, men.
Well, thank you, Michelle. First of all, we have a law in the land. This new law would only serve the plaintiffs' lawyers of our country. I've worked my entire life supporting equal pay for equal work. But I have to tell you, this is, again, another false attack that's been disproven by independent fact checkers. And when you look at the reason why she's trying to distract us away from the real issue of job creation, you understand why. The Obamacare law, the signature law of this president, is killing 2.5 million jobs right now. We've said that. And yet she supports that law. She would even want to expand that law. I'm sorry, but when 400,000 Georgians, more Georgians have gone on food stamps and have actually gotten jobs in Georgia in the last 6 years, that's not the kind of law that we need. The EPA is killing thousands of jobs in our energy and our utility industries today. It's no wonder why Barack Obama wants Michelle Nunn in the Senate to fight for him. The people of Georgia want somebody to be a champion for them and fight for them and their families.
So, David, I do think the people of Georgia want someone who will fight for them, and I think the women and families of Georgia deserve someone who is going to fight to make sure that they are paid equally. Right now, Georgia women are paid 81 cents on the dollar to men. I don't think that's satisfactory. I think actions speak a lot louder than words, and clearly, both in terms of your history and experience, I feel like you would be in the position to say, we do need to do better here, and we must. And in fact, every time that we actually have the opportunity to talk about a substantive issue like this, you move it to a conversation in which you decide you're running again against the president. So, I think, again, that women and families deserve pay equity, and I'm disappointed that you won't join me in actually advancing that goal.
Michelle, I absolutely agree that we need parity, and there's always improvement around the world. But I haven't gotten you yet to talk about Obamacare. I mean, this is what you said. You bragged about, oh, it's a great bill. I support the president in this bill. And yet it's killing 2.5 million jobs right now. Go even further. Let's talk about amnesty. His amnesty bill will bring 15 million new low-wage workers into our country at a very time when we have fewer people working than at any time since Jimmy Carter. It just seems to me that this president is adamant about getting you in the Senate because he needs you to be his rubber stamp in the Senate. His failed policies are indeed on the ballot. And in Georgia, they go by the name of Michelle Nunn.
All right, Ms. Perdue, you'll get your chance to ask a question in just a moment, but Ms. Swafford, it is your turn to ask a candidate question, and then we'll get back to you, Ms. Nunn.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Perdue. And you've had a lot of support in this Senate race from Senator Rand Paul, Senator Ted Cruz, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Governor Chris Christie, former governor and presidential candidate Mitt Romney, former Congressman Allen West, and your cousin is the former governor of the great state of Georgia. Given this support from these well-connected individuals, how can you call yourself an outsider, political outsider in this environment?
Well, thank you, Ms. Swafford. That's easy, because I am. I've spent 40 years and never been in politics, never thought about doing this. But what have we done in this campaign is we've reached and struck a nerve in the state of Georgia. They want a change in Washington. I went into an event back in May, and I was opening the door, and a lady, and looked like she was in her 80s, walked up to me and said, "You're running for the Senate, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, I just have one question." I said, "Oh, boy, here we go." She said, "Have you ever run for office before, ever done anything in Washington?" I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Well, you got my vote." That message is repeated all over the state. People want a champion for them in Washington, not a rubber stamp for Barack Obama. Michelle Nunn was handpicked by Barack Obama. She's been funded by him. Is it any wonder why he wants her in the Senate to be his proxy? And any wonder why he needs her to support his agenda of, quote, good works? I believe the people in Georgia deserve better. And in Georgia, the name of those failed policies, again, is Michelle Nunn.
David Perdue, your opportunity to ask a question.
Well, can I get a rebuttal to that?
Yes, actually? You may.
Yeah. Mr. Perdue, forgive me, but I don't believe you on that. I'm the true outsider in this race. I don't have any political connections on that, and I'd have to say I am the outsider in this race for that reason.
Mr. Perdue. You want the question, or can I rebut that?
It's time for you to ask a question.
Well, let me first say, we're bringing a diverse group of people together in this campaign, and I'm very proud of that. All across the Republican Party, and even independents and libertarians have come to us and are resonating. Our message is resonating with them. I have a question for Michelle Nunn, though. President Obama's policies have been killing jobs. We've been talking about that tonight, and hurting Georgia's families. Obamacare alone is killing 2.5 million jobs. The EPA is killing thousands in several industries. And this president in the last 6 years has loaded up $7 trillion of more debt with nothing to show for it on the jobs front. We have fewer people working today than at any time since Jimmy Carter was president. In Georgia, 400,000 more people had to go on food stamps than actually got jobs. I think the next U.S. Senator